So thank you very much. Not sure how I respond to being the tail end of things, but that's okay. I guess I am the tail end because I think I'm the person holding you up from alcohol receptions and fun. So we'll talk about insurance at this point. So let me talk a little bit about myself. I practiced medical oncology for 22 years. I was trained in stem cell transplant. I've transplanted more than a few thousand patients in my life. And I moved over into the business world because I felt that there needed to be a greater clinical line of sight in terms of decision making on the payer side. So what you guys are all doing is very noble. It certainly is inspiring to a great number of patients. But at the same time, there are some concerns that I, as representing the payer industry, would suggest that people think about. And it's not just the payers who are beginning to question the costs associated with everything that's going on, but it's also articles and letters in the New England Journal of Medicine this week. There was the New York Times article last week. So let me go through some of the things that other people are saying. So from the New York Times, half of prescriptions now for every one of us in the United States cost less than $5. 23% of us pay nothing in terms of out-of-pocket expenses. 2.3% of prescriptions accounted for 30% of all outpatient costs. Almost 90% of prescriptions in the United States are currently generic. Generic prescriptions, as everyone's aware, are very inexpensive. Last year, 36 new drugs were introduced, more than at any point in the last decade. 10 were for oncology, but of that 36, 17 were for orphan diseases. This is catching the attention of a lot of people. Employer-sponsored health plans have begun very aggressively shifting costs to patients around pharmaceutical costs. In last year, 23% of plans placed specialty drugs in their own special tier. That's up from 5% less than 10 years ago. And specialty tiers throughout the United States will be ubiquitous by the end of this year. CVS says that there's a 15.6% increase in specialty drug spend, whereas there was only a 0.8% increase last year. And Express Scripts in the New York Times said last week that they expect specialty drugs to increase in terms of cost by 63% between the years 2014 and 2016. So I would submit to you that people in this room have caught the attention of the nation. So let's go through this slide. And when you get old, you have trouble reading at particular distances. But you guys know these facts infinitely better than I do. But there are now 30 million people who potentially could be affected in terms of orphan drugs. There are more than 7,000 rare diseases. Everyone in this room recognizes that orphan drugs secure higher prices, that there is a significant decrement in competition, that there's a 7-year exclusivity period, that there are tax credits, R&D credits, waived FDA fees, shorter development timelines, greater regulatory chances of success. And that's good. But I would submit to folks here that there's a potential for a perfect storm. And the perfect storm would be that with the better science that all of the smart people here and elsewhere have put in terms of developing these drugs, and coupled with the manufacturer's significantly increased level of sophistication in terms of dealing with all this, and with the FDA having these incentives, et cetera, that we may get to the point that society is looking at the costs and seriously asking who's going to pay for this and what's the mechanism. And so people can, at the end of this, throw sharp instruments at me, but recognize that the payers are really a reflection of society and you in terms of trying to figure out how we pay for certain things. I would also suggest that people look at the macro economic aspect of the world at this point and remember that payers no longer underwrite. So underwriting means that one looks and sees what the risks were and selects particular populations. Underwriting is not something that payers do at this point through a vast majority of their members. I'd also say that if you look at what's happening from the global standpoint, that dollars have been shifted from the specialty world back into the primary care world. So the amount of dollars that are expected to be spent in terms of health, maintenance of health, and monitoring patients is significantly higher now than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And I would contrast this all with the amount of spending on specialties and orphans. So if you think about this, our approach, I think most payers' approach, your approach is the right drug, right person, right time. Okay, so we've been saying that for quite some time. That's precision. But I would submit to you that society may begin to ask the question of who actually is the right person, and society may ask the question, what is the right time? Now, if we looked at who was manufacturing orphan drugs before, 10 years ago, I think the list would have been very different than it is now, but I would suggest that one look closely here. And I would submit that oncology drugs generally return about $70 billion per drug over their lifetime, and other diseases, $40 billion. So I don't know what the intent of the FDA and others were with the process in the past, but I think what's apparent to the payers and society is that a particular product can go through an orphan process and then go through, after approval, for multiple other indications. And this is good, but at the prices that are being asked for, this may be challenging. The pipeline remains very robust in the orphan drug list. I only put a few of the oncology ones up here, so this is incomplete, but just so people are aware, this train is going to continue. So I think we as a society look at the products and the innovation and the brilliance that are being that occur with these products, but as I said, I think people are quite concerned with regard to the costs. Remember that 9 out of 27 of these drugs and 13 were orphans. Payers used to worry about specialty drugs. So 5 years ago, they set up specialty clinics because specialty drugs cost about $4,000 to $5,000. Now payers are looking and saying, well, orphan drugs cost somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000 a month, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with these very significant costs because society is asking us to think about this. So the process in the past was at the top. The process in the future is in the bottom, where we're really looking pretty quickly at the costs, recognizing that there are limited alternatives and that there's fast tracking. So what could be the approach, or what might be approach for various plans? These are things that would be traditionally done: prior authorization, price protection, rebate programs, limited networks, clinical programs, specialty pharmacy, site of care pharmacies, changing responsibility more to patients. So one will get the right drug for the right patient, but the question is, even within the right time, is this enough? Because this looks surprisingly like what happened with the specialty markets, right? And I would submit that given the rapidly increased costs, I think society is going to begin to ask and evaluate outcome, and they'll ask for more than precision. They'll begin to ask about value. And I strongly emphasize that that I think value is going to become the watchword for the next number of years in terms of assessment of expensive drugs. Right now, the environment that you all live in is a tolerant market, lack of governing body to limit pricing, few categories in terms of competition, and there may or may not be a surrogate marker. But I might ask, given the success, given the pipeline that you've seen, given the costs, do you think at some point that people may look at the conditions that there are now and ask whether the conditions should change? And if not, how are we going to pay for this? Now, certainly Humana and payers want the best treatments for all of their members. If one of us had one of these diseases, we would certainly want that. But I think we're going to continue to see that value will be an important aspect of the discussion. And as I think about how to begin to solve the problem, if one does not want to change the paradigm that I just talked about in the previous slide, that payers are going to look at drug access, they'll look at genetic testing, and I think you're going to start seeing a fairly strong look at real-world data in terms, does this really work in the population that we represent as opposed to population that was tested in the trial? And then I think people are going to be looking very carefully at patient responses in terms of, do the patients view this as being of value? I would suggest that pharmaceutical manufacturers should be looking at, and certainly are interested, in terms of therapeutic response, overall response, survival, discontinuation rate, hospitalization rate, et cetera. But I think we're going to need to work together to assess true effectiveness, measure endpoints, and begin to look at shared financial responsibility. I think if one looks at a number of European models with various oncolytics, one recognizes a paradigm of payment for success and lack of payment for failure. And I think that the payer world is going to begin to look at how does one begin to align incentives and outcomes of all parties. Certainly the manufacturers want to ensure that with the precision that the right person's being treated, and that's certainly what the payers want. So in summary, this is going to continue to be an increasing issue. I think you're going to find a greater amount of discussion nationally. I think you'll see it globally, to be quite honest. We as a society have to figure out how we're going to pay for this, for all of the innovation that we have. So for the manufacturers here, if you're selling product in various European countries, you know you've got a closed box system. So for every patient who consumes one of these wonderful products in a closed box system, other people are not being treated with something else. We don't have that system at this point, but begin to think about what all the financial insurance systems are moving towards, and I would suggest that collaboration is certainly going to be needed between regulators, payers, and manufacturers. So you might want to get a drink now. I was asked to do this talk. I'm happy to answer questions. Just don't shoot the messenger.
Thank you. Roy, I have a question for you. So some of the folks in the audience have what we call rare disease drugs or ultra rare. So even our company has a drug in development for less than 2,000 patients, so less than 1% of the orphan drug definition. Does Humana or insurers draw any distinctions like that when you're looking at reimbursement pricing of those ultra rare drugs versus a multiple myeloma drug, for example, that might have, more than 50,000 patients?
You mean as an oncologist, should I?
Sure.
Yes, I think ultra rare diseases are different, and I think there's that recognition. I think if one gets to 100,000 patients with a particular type of lung cancer that you can now treat with another disease, with another indication, that is fundamentally different than an ultra rare process, which is why I went to great length to ensure that people saw the difference in terms of the manufacturers now versus before. For an ultra rare process, it is what it is. People are going to be unlucky. They're going to get it. And if there's a treatment, then that is spectacular. That's wonderful. I'm glad that we have that ability to treat the person.
Okay. I'm going to forgo some of my closing remarks time for one question from the audience for Roy? No? I think people are anxious to get that drink. Roy Beveridge, thank you very much.
Thank you.